Issa. Okay, Issa?
Yes.
Asa Galloway.
Issa Galloway defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future with a more sophisticated approach.
Welcome back to the show, guys. I have a fantastic guest that I know you guys are going to love. His name is Pastor Tommy Airey. A little bit about him. He is the co-founder of Radical Discipleship, which is a space designated to animate expressions of Christian faith committed to breaking rank with supremacy in every form. He's also a member of the Christian Collective for Palestine, and he's the author of a fascinating book called Descending Like a Dove, Adventures in Decolonizing Evangelical Christianity. He has a Substack titled Something Else, and he writes about summoning spiritual strength, depth, and moral clarity, as well as political courage. So without further ado, I want to welcome Pastor Tommy Airey to the show. Good morning, Pastor Tommy. How are you doing today?
Feeling good on this fall morning. It's great to see your face. It's good to be connecting off Facebook.
Oh yeah. Social media is such a mixed thing, especially Facebook, you know. Ugh. I wanted to start off because this is the first time my audience is going to get to hear from you. And I think the moment is so perfect for us to talk because of your background. And that recent story ProPublica released, and everybody's now covering it, and I know you're not a politico, but of young Republicans and these just horrific racist group chats that have been exposed. Um, and one of the things you told me about when you were growing up was that you grew up in a very tight-knit, um, I think fair to say, very right-wing evangelical upbringing. Can you talk a little bit about that part of your faith journey, how you started off, and how that ties into the Republican identity? You told me a story about someone who was, I think, a teacher in your youth.
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up when I was 10 years old. My mom took my brother and I out of the public schools and transferred us into a private fundamentalist Christian school in Southern California suburbs. My mom actually got a job teaching there. She was teaching fifth grade at the time, and yeah, my one of my favorite teachers ever, Mr. Cavallero. We would read the Bible every morning, have our devotional, and after whoever read the verse, Mr. Cavallero would say, "God said it, I believe it, and that settles it." I was raised up in this very supremacist way of understanding the world. And as Anthea Butler does such a good job of articulating in her book, White Evangelical Racism, the racism is baked into the tradition. And that's something that's really important to understand. That doesn't mean that we were taught to say the N-word or to use racial epithets, but the supremacist way of understanding the world was baked into the tradition, and it was baked into this very I fell in love with Jesus. The gospel stories moved me. Living a life committed to love and humble service and compassion was also baked into that, which is very paradoxical. But as you stated, that white evangelical Christian tradition for 45 years now has been right-wing Republican. And that's what I grew up with in the mid 80s. And that's what I believed until I was about 30 years old. So I was all in. I was, when I became a high school teacher, I was the advisor for an organization called Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
I became an associate pastor at a daughter church of Saddleback Church, which at the time was the second largest church in North America.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean that's where I was until I was about 30, and I started to ask some questions, and for the last 20 years, I've been unwinding and getting free from those old scripts that I grew up with.
Well, and one in particular you told me about, I don't know if this is the same teacher, but you said that anytime a group of young men were together and he would pass you in the hallway, he would say something pretty kind of peculiar that wasn't religious in nature, but political in nature. Can you tell that story? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, this was like probably the most popular young male teacher on campus, and we would walk by, and consistently he would say, "Good morning, young Republicans." I mean, that was, he didn't know our names,
Right.
he didn't know anything about us, but that was how he greeted. As far as I can tell, that's how he greeted everybody. Like, that was his kind of standard
And this
thing.
was in
Yeah.
California, right?
Southern, yeah, Orange County suburbs.
And who was the head pastor of Saddleback? Like he's a pretty famous individual, right?
Yeah, his name is Rick Warren.
Yeah.
So he came out with that book, Purpose Driven Life, and sold millions of copies, and prayed at Obama's inauguration, and yeah, huge
Well,
name.
and the thing is like purpose-driven life and like I'm a Muslim. I believe in Islamic orthodoxy, and I'm very committed to my faith. So when you say, for instance, if God said it, I believe it, and that's the end of it. Like inherently, I don't think there's anything wrong with having confidence in your faith. In fact, I think that's a very good thing, right? But what I think you're alluding to isn't confidence or devotion or real belief. I think what you're alluding to, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is like a lack of nuance or a framing that's not like all of the things that go with that framing are not explicitly understood by the people who are being, kind of inculcated into it, right?
That's right. So what happens when a um, and all sacred texts are interpreted, but in the evangelical Christian tradition, that is not named. So what happens when um, a white male Republican um, interprets the scriptures and says this is the word of God, and that settles it? Um, that's where I would say there's a real problem, and
Okay.
that's what we're witnessing. I mean, and again, that this is fundamentalism. It is a lack of kind of humbly understanding there are different interpretations, and that there's frameworks that we read these texts through, and that is never acknowledged in evangelical Christianity.
And I think nuance is just lost today in America in general. I mean, on all sides, right? Everybody's so hunkered down into the righteousness of their own cause. And one of the things because you're going to be part of uh, a series of interviews that I'm releasing. I interviewed this fascinating Muslim sister who used to be all in on DEI, uh, and she still is, but she's taking a anti-colonialism approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you have a book that talks about decolonizing Christianity, and I'm going to put the link to that in the description below for everybody to have resources for it. Um, and I think that this is a good opportunity for us to really kind of talk about nuance because you've come from this kind of right wing Christian evangelical space, and now you're helping people unpack that. But you're also, doing a lot with left wing people as well. Um, what do you see as a challenge on, like identity and civics when it comes to the intersections that you travel in?
Yeah, I use the language of being post-evangelical.
Okay.
That evangelical Christianity has really shaped me, but I've moved beyond it. And I would use the language of repentance. I'm repenting from it for the rest of my life.
Oh,
That
wow.
Christian language. So I'm still
That's pretty
deeply
hardcore
rooted.
language, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I would also say that I also use the language of being post-liberal as well. So, part of our journey, my spouse Lindsay and I, we living in Southern California at the time, we drove to Vegas in the the last weekend before the 2008 election to campaign for Barack Obama. We believed in his progressive vision of the world that he campaigned on, and we're delighted that he won. But we also got soured by the experience, and it was a really important part of our journey and understanding that the liberal vision of politics is diverse and multicultural empire, and that's highly, highly problematic. It is super Islamophobic. It is racist. It is America first without wearing the Trump hats. So Butch Ware talks about Butch Ware, who's running for governor of California, a black Muslim. He talks about red MAGA and blue MAGA. They're two sides of the same coin. So for me, and being post-liberal, it's going through that process of understanding these things, understanding that a diverse and multicultural and equitable world is a really good thing, but not if we're going to leave into place an empire that is destroying the planet, an empire that is built on exclusion and exploitation and extraction of the rest of the world, including these colonized sections of our country, and including one of those spaces where I live currently in Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is 80% black, and Detroit is one of our mentors here in the city. A black woman by the name of Deborah Taylor calls Detroit the beta test for what's about to happen to the rest of America. And what's happened in the last decade in Detroit, 1/3 of the entire city has lost their home to illegal tax foreclosure.
Yeah.
So what the city is doing is overcharging the poorest residents, almost all of them black, on their property taxes, and they've lost their homes. So what that's doing is it's taking black people out of the homes they lived for decades, and it's providing more land for development, so that these rich developers can come in and do what they want with it. And so there's all sorts of conversation, headlines of newspapers that talk about the comeback of Detroit. That's all built on the backs of black people. And meanwhile, all of these
Exploitation,
right? Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and the city is subsidizing this development using taxpayer money to build up downtown and midtown into basically a playground for mostly white suburban city, and go to restaurants and go to sporting events and do their thing. So,
That I have so many thoughts because I used to joke that Tennessee was like the anti-immigrants playground or the Islamophobe or anti-Muslim playground, because they would always put at the state level legislation against the Muslim community. And they first started by the harshest anti-Sharia bill that the country ever saw. And of course, it was unconstitutional, but then they tried to piecemeal it through, year after year and session after session. But where what you're saying really kind of gives me an internal conflict. And I don't know where you sit politically on this, but like on the one hand, you see people who are so purist, where like there's a huge backlash now against Zohar Mandani because he said that he's not going to question people if they're Zionists to be like part of the sewer system and that kind of thing. And I get it, right? Like when people, I understand where they're coming from, but like on the other hand, like you have to, for me, this is where I stand. I think you have to have this level of pragmatism. Like he apologized for calling NYPD racist. Um, that was a blanket statement, right? And you can say the blanket effect at that time that he was speaking definitely, was that. But, and again, I don't know. I have a hard time with this because I tend to engage with law enforcement a lot because my community is targeted for hate crimes all the time, and you have to rely on law enforcement to protect you, track down the people who do hate crimes. So I guess what I'm trying to ask you is this tension between, on the one hand, looking for like almost purity or perfection from a candidate, and on the other hand, does that lead to apathy and not voting? Because it feels like um, the most righteous of us are the sometimes too disengaged or too disillusioned that um, it makes room for these racist policies to take place. Like, do you see where I'm going? Do you have some reactions to that?
Yeah, yeah, no question. And I think there's a fine line between discerning these kinds of purity tests
Yeah.
um, and having a red line. So, like for me right now as a voter, just strictly talking about electoral politics, I will not, I will never vote for somebody who continues to send weapons to Israel. That's a red line for me.
Me too.
And so we're talking about most of the Democratic Party,
Mhm.
and obviously all of the Republican Party. I mean, but that's, to me, that's a red line, and that was a red line for me in the last presidential election. I refused to vote for Kamala Harris, and it was something for me in discerning with other people a year before that. I made a commitment that I would, if Biden and Harris did not come up with a ceasefire agreement and shut this thing down because they had the power to do it, then I wouldn't vote for them.
Right.
And so that's what I continue to do. And I have been refreshed and compelled by Mamdani's campaign. I mean, what he's doing is absolutely brilliant, and I think it's okay also to be disappointed, as I have been, in hearing some of these comments that he's made in the last couple of weeks in the lead up to the election, where it feels like he's watering down a little bit of some of his prior statements and so on and so forth. And also, like you, I do think that, like when it comes to the police department, just calling the police racist is actually not helpful.
Right.
But I think it's important to unpack how the police department, how the system is is racist. I mean, here's how it works. Here's what it does to black folks. Here's what it has continued to do to black Americans for decades. Here's what it does to Muslims. Here's how the discrimination and the actual racism is played out, and let's end it. Let's do what we can to work for a system that doesn't do that. So yeah, I mean, those are a few comments that I would make. But I mean, what Mamdani has done, and what he has said as a political candidate, let alone a mayoral candidate for New York City, the largest city in our country, is incredible. Incredible. Just like gone straight after the Zionist lobby and told the truth.
Mhm. Well, and you're now seeing, Democratic politicians refunding APAC money. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that it may not be repackaged in a different name or under a different way, but the mere fact that you're seeing these things, and it shows that the tide is shifting, which is refreshing. And I feel like the people on the most extreme of either purity test, um, especially on, rehumanizing dehumanized people and fighting against oppression, those people, like for me, they play the same role that the ultra orthodox in any faith community play. It's like an anchor to keep us from going too far, the wrong direction. And you need that kind of constant, uh, criticism, even if it feels like it's from the fringes. If they're morally correct, you need that pressure to keep you based, I think. Um, but what I worry about is the effect of voter apathy, or people just not voting because they don't believe in the system anymore. And the thing that I always feel is a huge issue is that if voting was so ineffective or not a threat to power, why do they work so hard to make it hard for people to vote and to purge voter rolls and to um, limit people's ability? Why are they trying to, jerry rig the election? Why are they trying to, um, redistrict everywhere and create the Supreme Court decision ahead of us right now could give 22 seats to Republicans. It's one of the scariest things I've ever seen, and no one's talking about it. And to me, one of the things that when I was a Catholic, one of the things that made me really believe in Catholicism was they had exorcism. So it's like if the devil hates Catholics and like then probably I'm on the right side because you know what I'm saying? Um, and so if your enemy's going against things for you, shouldn't you then like understand that's something to protect? I mean, what do you think about that with voting and apathy? Or is it even apathy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I understand it. I understand voter apathy. I understand not voting because our choices are so limited, and that we have this duopoly that basically agrees on all the things, and then there's this culture war that kind of divides it. I mean, the way that I understand electoral politics in the United States, the way that I have come to understand it, is that this is a right wing conversation between two parties, and so I understand the apathy,
Mhm.
and it's disheartening, because there has to be a third way. Let's use our vote. Let's use our voice to first of all push these progressive candidates to be more progressive, to decolonize their politics, and move them to the left. To be frank, and if they don't do that, then we go third party. And I think that there are third party candidates that are starting to emerge too, that are compelling, and there's all sorts of obstacles against third parties growing, and that's part of the duopoly,
Yeah.
that both Republicans and Democrats, those parties are spending a lot of money and a lot of time limiting those choices.
Yeah, my first take when I saw Zohran Mandani was that it doesn't matter if he wins or loses. What matters is that Americans got exposed to ranked choice voting, right? Like that's an amazing thing that in Colorado, we almost got ranked choice voting, and then our governor squashed it at the last minute. It was tragic, and um, I just feel like that's the movement where if people really want to make systemic change, that's one of the first pillars, and then. But one thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is, and I'm sure you encounter this with, the retreats and the workshops you do. I wanted to ask you first to kind of give us the Cliff Notes version of your book, uh, and decolonizing, your faith journey, um, because it's going to be relevant to the next question I want to ask you, which is like you're dealing with someone who I tend to uh, really be a First Amendment advocate. I'm almost a free speech absolutist, except for well established, Supreme Court rulings and whatnot. And I'm also very civil liberties oriented. But at the same time, because I believe in Islam and Islamic orthodoxy, I'm pretty socially conservative. So I find myself always trying to figure out how to be the best ally to marginalized and targeted people, um, and how to actually, Christians always say, hate the sin but love the sinner, but like how to do that in an authentic way where I'm not using faith to bully people. So back to my first question to set up for the second. Can you give us the Cliff Notes version of your book? And again, the link will be in the description because I highly recommend people. It's on my to do, my reading list as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking, Isa. So yeah, I came out with the book in 2018, and I wrote the book in the aftermath of Lindsay and I moving to Detroit in 2014. We lived there from 2014 to 2016, and and left for a few years and then came back. A big part of what Detroit did to us and through us was to be to really read the world um, through Black people, through Black leaders, through Black community organizers and pastors in the city. We When we got to Detroit, we like right away we were working at a church and started to work with an organization called We the People of Detroit, who was delivering 30 gallons of water to victims of water shutoff. The city was shutting off the water of longtime low-income residents who couldn't afford to pay their water bills. And This is neoliberalism.
Hmm.
This is austerity. And of course, the narrative was is that these Black folks could afford to pay their cable, but they couldn't afford to pay their water. It was blaming the victim. It was all these personal responsibility narratives, so on and so forth. Anyway, after 2 years in the city, and I decided to write this book to detail my own faith journey out of evangelical Christianity into a different way of following Jesus, into a decolonial way of following Jesus. I use a lot of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, Black freedom struggle, and kind of learning to read the scriptures in a way that I think is far more truthful and contextual than what I learned growing up as a 10-year-old at Capistrano Valley Christian School, reading it through the lens of the oppressed, reading it through the lens of the colonized. I mean, this is what Jesus was doing as a poor peasant Palestinian Jewish rabbi in the first century. And yeah, I mean, it's I call it part memoir, part manifesto. So what I'm trying to do in the book is what I'm, trying to do with my life and my Substack that I'm writing now, and my Facebook posts is to reconstruct. There's a lot of talk about deconstructing evangelical Christianity,
Hmm.
but I see my primary work as reconstructing this around truth, beauty, and goodness, and agape love that is rooted in the prophetic biblical tradition. And so I tell a lot of stories and kind of dig into my own ancestry, um, and I start with the story of my dad, who was going to UCLA in 1965, and he said in passing one day, a couple decades ago when he was still alive, that he was there in April of 1965 when Dr. King gave a speech at UCLA.
Wow.
And so I kind of unpack that speech a little bit, and think about the next step that I am taking in faith, taking the baton from my dad, who his dad was a George Wallace supporter, extremely racist, first generation American, immigrant from England. His mom was Irish. So my dad took the baton and took a step towards a more kind of like neutral position. And my dad voted for Republicans and he voted for Democrats, and it drove me crazy. But 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 I feel like I'm looking at the long arc of the moral universe, and taking that next step of our ancestry, and healing our line, and getting free, and moving towards collective liberation.
Yeah, that's such a fascinating story because, like, um, I think often when we talk about like white evangelicalism or Christian nationalism, and I call it white Christian nationalism because, like, not to be, like hashtag not all men or whatever, like, I feel like there's serious beef between different types of Christians, and it hasn't ever healed. I mean, my wife comes, she's Muslim as well, but she comes from the AME tradition, which is African Methodist Episcopal. And Methodist and Episcopal don't really go together theologically on the surface, right? But they were kind of forced together through racism and came up with this dynamic church that's always had social justice at its core. And then, like you, my father was raised as a, not like you, but there's a point here where my father and your father have similar story arcs. My dad was raised Mormon, and then he left the Mormon church when he realized they wouldn't let black people be ministers during his time. He was just like, this can't be right. And, so I think we both kind of have this rebel in our lineage. Where I'm going with all this is like, I feel like that when we criticize white nationalism, people tend to do what they do with like diversity, equity, and inclusion training when it's done wrong. They feel like it's like shaming and guilting white people. And and I feel like that's a lazy intellectual response because to me, I don't walk around thinking myself as a white guy. I walk around thinking of myself as a human and what I stand for and what I believe in. Right. So, like, when someone criticizes white people, I mostly think about like, if I react to that criticism in a way that's critical, it's mostly like, don't hurt your own movement by not reaching the people you're trying to reach. Right? Like, don't make it so hard for them to start opening their mind. And it comes because, like, I've had bikers who are, like Harley Davidson types will come to a pro-Palestinian protest on the side of the oppressed, but then they'll get trashed for looking, like big beard and and the people that they wanted to support treated them like garbage, and they're like, well, after this, I'll just go home. I still think what's happening to Palestine's wrong. And then you got opportunists like, Margie Taylor Greene, who will celebrate, and the exact same time she's saying anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim stuff. Um, and it just feels like, how do we, because you do this and you do it effectively. So like, how do we reach the folks that we need to reach in a way that makes them think, but also, uh, I don't want to coddle them, but I guess I asked my question. So what do you want? What would you say?
Well, and we're so what whiteness does, and the principality of whiteness works off of guilt. It's a guilt innocence narrative. So
Interesting.
when we talk about white Christian nationalists, immediately the way that we are shaped is to feel guilty. Ah, that. But the shift, and this is a spiritual move. The shift is to grief. Um, the more that we can learn to grieve what whiteness has done to my ancestors and what it has done to me spiritually and emotionally, to me that's the paradigm shift, and that's the key move. And it's a move that
Interesting.
takes time, right? We can, like it's not a sound-bited move. It's a commitment to undoing whiteness for the rest of my life. And to be specific, so I've got five great 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 grandparents that survived the genocide in Ireland in the mid 19th century. Somehow they got out. I don't know the story,
Mhm.
but the next generation was in Scotland, and eventually my great grandmother immigrated to Central Washington. Um, my those ancestors were not white until they got to the United States, and so my grandfather, he had all sorts of white privilege, even though he was a first generation immigrant. Got to go to college, like started his own pharmacy, and as I shared earlier, huge George Wallace supporter. Called Dr. King, everything but a child of God. Um, that whiteness has emotionally devastated me and my family. And so much of my own spiritual journey is to reclaim my Celtic roots, who I was before I became white, before I was trained to be a supremacist, back when my ancestors learned to live mutually, learned to live sustainably, learned to treat each other as a village, with compassion and with empathy, and to live in a way that's simply and loving towards all. So I mean, that's the start of the conversation that I would, with these folks that are white Christian nationalists. I believe that a third of our country, about a third of our country, like I'm not trying to convert them. I'm talking about white Christian nationalists. They're not in a place that, spiritually and emotionally to be converted, but there's a lot of folks who are in this kind of middle third of the United States who are asking some really important questions and are open to seeing the ways that they've been brainwashed by organized religion, by corporate media, by the school system, by all sorts of things, and they're undoing those things. But they're looking for tools, and they're looking for outlets, and they're looking for other ways to be involved in this movement for collective liberation. Who truly believe that this world should work for everyone.
It's so deep because, like, when you were telling the story, it reminded me of that old movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, The Gangs of New York, and how the Irish literally had to fight for their survival. I mean, it was also Catholic Protestant in that setting, but um, I think you said it was kind of a spiritual transition to grief, right? Am I correct? And the reason I mentioned that is because it's interesting to me to think about there's a rap lyric of a guy, his name is Brother Ali, he's like a Muslim rapper, and he says something about I forget exactly how the lyric goes, but it's something like when it's hell that you're traveling through, everything that the slave master does affects you too, something like that. And essentially what he's saying, the whole idea of that. This is actually very Islamic in the Islamic tradition. One time, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Help your brother, even if he's the oppressor." And they asked him, like, "What do you mean? How do you help an oppressor?" And it's like you prevent him from his oppression. You correct him. And what I keep thinking is that, like, people are in pain, and like when I see a white nationalist post something like "blood and soil," and they haven't ever posted anything about what they've done with their life. All they can talk about is their lineage or their race. It just feels like they're hurting because either they've lived a non-impactful life, they've never accomplished anything. It all seems like fear and pain based. Like language when you really kind of psychoanalyze it. Um, and so what I'm asking, like when you talk about grief, it has to be a point where it turns to joy at some point, right? Or it moves because like one of the critiques of it, like I find Robin DiAngelo, one of the people I think grifts off of the DEI movement. I find her like she kind of like pushes a message that says like all white people are always going to be racist and you always have to check your racism and you're like walking on eggshells all the time with yourself. And that just doesn't seem like a sustainable way to live. I mean, I think everybody has bigotry in them, but at the end of the day, like we live in a system that's very privileged for the majority here, of course. But how do you shift from, like that kind of pain and anger and fear then to grief? Where does it go out to? Because I think people are attracted to happiness, to hope, to joy.
Right. Yeah. And this is, I mean, Isa, I think that this is like where our faith traditions really come into play. In the script, in the Christian scriptures, it says, "We carry this treasure in jars of clay, so that we may know that this all-surpassing power comes from God and not from us." In other words, I live a fragile, messy, cracked, imperfect life. The power that comes out of me, the potential and the capacity to love, to forgive, to extend mercy and grace and compassion to other people, I believe comes from a divine source. And so I think they go together. I am going to, as D'Angelo writes, I'm going to live a messy life around race for the rest of my life. I mean, it is baked into our entire system.
Right.
So I can't get out of it, but like that's not the point. Like we all have a mess of a life, and to tap into the grace to live in a different way every once in a while is it contains a tremendous amount of joy. And yeah, I mean, to your point, like the joy is everything. And this is something that I've learned a tremendous amount from Black folks and from Palestinians and Muslims who, just are forever on the other side of empire and the targets of empire, um, and contain this kind of beauty and joy in the midst of all of that oppression. That is powerful, and calls me to another way.
Yeah, one of the most sadly amazing things I'd ever seen, a couple months into the genocide was this video where it had, um, like people dancing and giving their food to their pets, and like amongst the rubble. And I always see that, like when you had the food distributions points just a couple months ago being targets, for the starving people to come get, like a sack of lentils or something, and being shot at on the way out. One of the things that always shocked me was like you had Randy Fine, saying "let them starve," and he's a grossly obese individual, and it reminded me of like Black Friday sales where people literally are fighting over video game consoles and just a couple of dollars, and how like how sick society is when that happens. And then you contrast it with like these Palestinian people who'd lost their whole family, and they're literally starving, and then they get some scraps for sustenance, and then they're leaving willing to share it with one another. It's like it it's the saddest and also most awe-inspiring kind of hopeful thing all at the same time. um, and I feel like you're absolutely right, because the people who I see who can embody grace the most are the people who have been traumatized so heavily. Um, I was mentioning to you before we started recording that I had interviewed the former ambassador from South Africa to the United States, Ebrahim Rasool, and he had marched with and went to jail with and fought apartheid in South Africa with Nelson Mandela. Um, and one of the interesting things that he talked about was Nelson Mandela had taught that, you know, once he was out of jail and freed and, politically empowered, he taught his movement, surprise them with your generosity. Um, and of course, Ibrahim Rasool is a practicing Muslim like me, and he connected that to the example of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, on a number of occasions. But like when Prophet Muhammad returned to Mecca after being, expelled from Mecca, and the Muslims being, persecuted there, um, when he came back and empowered, he made it forbidden for anyone to harm the people who had oppressed his community. Um, and I think one of the things that scares people who are on the side of oppression and are starting to wake up is one of the tricks to keep them on the oppressive side is like, and you hear this from the Republicans all the time. In fact, I want to say Steve Bannon and Steve Miller have both said this, that Republicans have to win in the midterms or else the Democrats are coming after us. Um, and I wanted to ask you about this because grace and forgiveness, but there's also accountability for you as a person of faith. How do you balance that? Like, um, when the tide turns towards justice, what would that look like for you? Is it all about uplifting of the poor people still, or is there a necessity for retribution or accountability? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So this week I've been, I come out with my Substack every Sunday morning. This week I've been just meditating on this poem by June Jordan, who was a black poet in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Very pro-Palestinian, especially at a time where, I mean, she lost a lot of gigs and got death threats. But she wrote this poem in the mid 70s called I Must Become a Menace to My Enemies. And I won't even try to paraphrase this poem because I won't do it justice, but that concept of becoming a menace to my enemies is really profound to me, especially in this moment, because what it says to me, or what it calls to me, is the importance of putting up a boundary to abusers, to supremacists, to fascists, to white Christian nationalists, to gaslighters.
Mhm.
It's putting up that boundary. And you alluded to it earlier, Isa. It is honoring the humanity of our enemies when we put up a boundary to their dehumanizing behavior.
Right.
So that accountability is crucial in our move forward, and whatever sorts of like electoral political wins we get. Um, that accountability, that boundary is crucial, whatever that looks like. And I mean, like in South Africa, the concept of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission
Right.
was based on truth. The truth has to come out in our society. The truth from way back to the genocide of our indigenous population, to the enslavement of African peoples, the lack of reparation, the ongoing nature of our federal government failing to honor treaties with indigenous people.
Over and
We can
over
go
and over
on and
again.
on and on,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and it's
I mean, just right now,
throughout the global South.
The Trump administration, I don't know the town, but it was in Alaska. He canceled a $25 million improvement project of an Inuit tribal land, and then the whole city got wiped off the map on a natural disaster. Literally, it's in the headlines last week. Um, so yeah, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just the ongoing nature of this is so frustrating and so like, but the gaslighting, I'm so glad you said that, because I think what happens more often when people talk, they reveal, like, especially when they're criticizing someone or something, I think they're really just telling you who they are rather than they're trying to point the attention at the other. But, like with the genocide apologist, almost everything they say, they say every accusation is an admission, right? And we've seen so much of that. But I think the Republicans, when and I hate to say Republicans because I remember even in a George W. Bush and Bush, the son, I think he's a war criminal. But like even during his time, you had people who had, some connection to humanity still. I remember Condoleezza Rice famously said to one of the other cabinet members, if we wanted the Israeli position, we would have went to the embassy. And like, there's some solid people across the political spectrum. And then if nothing else, like they're all still human beings, and like we should always have hope for that. So what I wanted to honor in what you said is this, the gaslighting part and the uplifting humanity and the truth part, because I think, the Islamic tradition, um, I think it's very similar to Christianity in its purest form when it talks about forgiveness. Um, because like um, one of the most interesting things, a scholar who's a friend of mine, he gave a talk, um, I believe it was the night before Yom Kippur or during a Yom Kippur service at a synagogue. And the topic, of course, was forgiveness. And he had mentioned how if you had backbit someone, you had to go not just apologize to the person, but then go like restore their reputation in all the places that you had, slandered them. So like it's an incredible task, like you have to humble yourself, say I was wrong, and then try to like repair the damage you did. Um, and that's such a, like just for words. um, but the interesting thing about that concept, and I remember the rabbi was going to speak after the imam, and he went through the whole gamut of like being forgiven in Islam and all the different steps you have to do. Um, and the rabbi said, I don't have enough chutzpah to take more of your time, so I'm just going to say ditto. After the imam was done, it was a beautiful moment. Um, and the interesting thing here, though, is just everything about forgiveness tends to be on first humbling yourself and realizing, being able to admit that you were wrong. And that's such a prideful challenge to our nature. So where I wanted to kind of give you sort of the last word, because we're getting close to an hour of time together, um, is when you're doing your retreats and one of the more frequent messages I think in your Substack is making us be humble enough to accept that there's flaws. So can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think you do that very deftly and articulately and effectively when I read your writing.
Mm, mm, yeah. Well, I mean, I think I would, it's important for me to just name that over the last decade, I've been attending 12-step groups. I go to a meeting called Al Anon, which is a group for people who are addicted to to peace, to keeping the peace in ways that are unjust,
Mm,
addicted to appeasement, addicted to not ruffling any feathers. And so within the 12-step movement, you know, it is confessional, it is taking personal inventory, it is being real. It is like coming to grips with my own codependency in these unjust systems that I have been shaped by. And just as you were just saying, it's not about just apologizing, but it's about making amends. It is naming. So the only way for me to get free, the only way for me to really think about my own liberation entails that I come to grips with my imperfections and my weaknesses and my failures. And and again, so much of that is being shaped by these systems, and that helps me give myself grace, and it helps me give other people grace because the root of all of this is the supremacist structures and systems that we've been shaped by here in the United States. That's what I believe, and it's about dismantling those systems within us and in the world.
when you say dismantling, do you think, for instance, like I tend to fall on the side that, and there's a great guy, he's almost a pop icon at this point now, Jonathan Haidt, and he has the book, The Righteous Mind, When Good People Disagree on Politics and Religion. And one of the things he does that helps us see each other as human again is he lays out like these five moral buckets that he kind of has crafted. And he says all of us to one degree or another, value each of the moral buckets, but some of them more than others. So he'll say leftists really value justice, right? Where conservatives really value stability. And I think this is where I tend to like have a favoritism towards stability, because I want to dismantle injustice. And I look at like the founding fathers, and they were quite clearly not just white, because whiteness has changed over time, and there's been all these challenges to who's white and what's white and all of this in the American context. But we do have a constitution, we have a First Amendment. Um, I feel like we can, without burning the system down, make corrections in the system. And I know I'm going to get on the line of, even incrementalism here, which is something a lot of oppressed peoples, and I haven't experienced any of those things. So I'm not empathetic enough to that stance. But it feels to me like we have a system where correction happens over time, and it just needs a more engaged citizenry to make that a reality. Like we can keep purifying the system. And so like I hear a lot of rhetoric from people who I mostly morally agree with, especially on um, issues of oppression and everything, but then they'll say uh like that they're anti-capitalism. And for me, I'm like, then they'll point to countries that are socialist in a way, but they're also capitalist, like your Norwegian style nations, Swedish kind of places. And so I wonder sometimes, are we just disagreeing on language and how things are said, or are they really wanting, anarchism? Or I guess what I'm really asking is, do you think the American system can be tweaked and redeemed, or do you think it needs to be a more radical approach? And
Um,
if that's a false
I think,
dichotomy that I'm setting you up in, call that out too.
yeah, well, I mean, I think that Dr. Butchware says it best that we better start dismantling empire before somebody else does it for us.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
and and the way I understand that is this empire is coming down, and it's going to be ugly.
Mm,
But what I believe our task, people of faith and conscience, in the belly of the beast, what our main task politically, is to dismantle the structures and systems of empire that is killing this planet. So and yeah, I mean we have this kind of relative concept of freedom and democracy here that benefits us materially and so on and so forth. But I, it is devastating to the rest of the world. Now,
yes.
strategically, how do we do this? Like what does this mean? Like how do we use electoral politics and direct action and mutual aid, those three things politically, in order to dismantle empire? Like that's going to be a long conversation that's
Of
well
course.
worth it, right? It's well worth it. But um, we, I think, I mean, just the thing that I've really been compelled by in the last 2 years is like, what is it going to take to dismantle just the duopoly, the two-party system in itself that is neoliberal and it is Zionist to the core. Um, without breaking that apart, I don't think we have a chance. So like how do we go about and do this?
For me,
How do
I
we
think one of
organize to
the
make it happen?
most interesting opportunities we have is the America First movement and this massive transfer, the greatest transfer of wealth upwardly in human history. Um, so it feels to me that, um, not to be an economic reductionist and ignore the racial element, but it feels to me like that we have this ability or this chance, and it's slipping through our fingers to claim a real kind of populism that is socially just at its core, uh, and to really turn the masses, why we can still vote together and why we still can protest towards, you know, um, anti-elitist. Um, towards, so for me, when it's breaking down systems, it's like putting things like ranked choice voting in, creating a, digital bill of rights, for us online, putting hard limits that if America would take leadership on, I'm sure the rest of the world would follow on, slowing down and putting a moral ethics into the development of super intelligence, machine learning, and AI. Like we have all of these abilities, but like the digital bill of rights, we currently live in a surveillance state, and we're empowering Peter Thiel and all these people, and bringing back things like the fairness doctrine to media, because we're having corporate buyouts. CBS is, 60 Minutes isn't going to be reliable anymore with Barry Weiss at the helm. Um, and if there's ever a time for the masses to wake up and just say, it's us versus the elitists, it's right now. But it feels like they've done such a good job on, the sharecroppers bargain and whiteness versus brown people and normalizing all this bigotry that it's almost unsurmountable. And that's why I asked you so many of the questions I did and where my critique comes from, because if they can keep us fighting each other for the scraps, they're going to keep advancing so fast. And um, I don't want to take any more of your time, but I do want to have you react to that. And then the last question I'll have for you is to ask you what I should have asked, but I didn't, because I don't think this conversation really scratched the surface of a lot of the work you do. And I really want my people who watch this channel to go check you out on your podcast. And on your Substack.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was a weird wake up call for me after Charlie Kirk was murdered, and I posted to Facebook, and all of these white men from the high school that I attended and taught at came out of the woodworks, glorifying Charlie Kirk as a godly family man. They earnestly believe with all their heart that he wasn't racist or Islamophobic or homophobic. He was just telling the truth. And I remember feeling those ways when I was 21, 22, 23. That's how I was shaped to understand the world.
Right.
But now when I listen to all of those Charlie Kirk clips, I mean, it is absolutely abysmal what he said and now how he's being characterized by 1/3 of our country. So I say that just to piggyback and rubber stamp what you just said. Ruling elites are tremendous. They continue to be tremendously effective at using race, primarily race, weaponizing race to divide the rest of us. And it is a task emotionally and spiritually that I take very seriously. But that experience for me was overwhelming. And then, and I'll just add this: the many white liberals in my network, appeasing that behavior. Ezra Klein being first in line in the New York Times, saying that Charlie Kirk did politics the right way. This is where we're at.
Yeah.
And but we have each other. We are part of a movement that is resisting this and working for something else. Something that is diametrically opposed to weaponizing these ideologies to divide us, and that is anti-supremacist at the core, and that is our hope. God bless these college students who created their encampments and continue to demand these campuses to divest from Zionist occupation, from companies profiting off of them, and standing up to these authorities in the most compelling way ever. I'm on their
And
side.
I love the statement, "The kids are all right." It's where we find the hope. So, what should I have asked you that I didn't? What's some final thoughts, things you're reflecting on, maybe a preview of your Substack you're going to drop tomorrow?
You should ask me if we should take Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Candace Owens seriously about what they're saying about Israel.
Oh, I'd love your thoughts on that. Let's go.
Because these are my people, right? These are
Right.
the people that I grew up with. So, I mean, I would just say that they're Christian nationalists. So the thing that's scary for me, and that's reality for me, is that when I listen to some of these Tucker Carlson sound bites, he is nailing it on what is happening to Palestinian people and
Hmm.
what Israel is doing right now. I mean, he's came on the scene a year and a half late, but right now he is saying clearly what so many Democratic politicians absolutely will not say, because they're owned by the lobby. But the problem for me is that Tucker Carlson's followers, like him, are anti-Semitic and Islamophobic and racist and homophobic, and so they can't tell the difference between Zionism and Judaism. So the more they turn on Israel, the more they're going to blame Jewish people for what's happened,
In mass, yes.
without giving a darn about Palestinians. or Muslims or any of these other folks that are, being oppressed by empire.
Honestly, I think you hit the foreshadowing 100% right, because if you look at FBI crime statistics, there's a serious correlation and overlap between the people who are anti-Semitic and the people who hate Muslims. There's almost, 100% overlap there. And to me, I look at all of this. I've never said this online before, but I believe it. What Candace Owens, MTG, Tucker Carlson, and all of them are doing is they're foreshadowing the break of the Christian right with the Jewish community. So they're the early warning. And this is going to mirror, 1492, the Reconquest, and then, the oppression that we saw in Spain of Jews and Muslims having to flee or hide their faith. So that's why I've been saying for a long time, Christian nationalism is the biggest threat to the United States that we have internally. So I'm going to link to your Substack, some podcast episodes that I found enlightening before, and to your book. Again, I appreciate your time this morning. I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have, because one thing I did want to talk about, and maybe we can get into in a future convo, is where like we break with people on our values, but we have other common issues together, and how to like gracefully navigate those kind of challenging circumstances. So I'll leave that as a cliffhanger for a future episode.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Thank you, brother, for all you're doing.
Thank you
So
back.
great
God
to be
bless you.
connected.
And I'll also have a bio of Tommy in our description, and I hope everybody subscribes to both of us. And it is the No Kings Protest Day. So if you're out there, be safe, know your civil rights, and make it civil disobedience so they can't lie about the movement. God bless you all.
Free Palestine.
Issa. Okay. Issa? Yes. Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway, convert to Islam, defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future, and a more sophisticated approach.